He opened his laptop, clicked into the meeting, and saw 4 faces he recognized immediately. His CFO, 2 other senior colleagues, people whose voices he'd heard on calls for years, whose faces he'd seen in 100 meetings just like this one. Over the next few minutes, on that call, he agreed to wire $25 million. Every single person on that screen was fake. This is Scam Files. Follow the evidence. The company is Arup, a UK-headquartered engineering firm with offices around the world, including one in Hong Kong. That's where this starts, in January 2024, with an employee in the finance department doing what finance employees do: reading email, processing requests, moving through an ordinary week. This wasn't someone untrained or careless. Finance departments at companies this size exist specifically to catch exactly this kind of thing. Approval chains, verification steps, a professional culture built around one core habit: don't move money based on a single unverified request, no matter how urgent it sounds. That habit is the entire job. It's what he was there to do. Then an email arrives. It looks like it's from the company's UK-based CFO. The subject is a confidential transaction, the kind of request that comes with built-in pressure not to ask too many questions, because secrecy is framed as the whole point. He didn't fall for it immediately. According to reporting on the case, his first instinct was suspicion. This had the shape of a phishing attempt, and he treated it that way. That instinct should have been the end of the story. In most versions of this scam, it is. Someone gets a strange email, hesitates, checks with a colleague, and the attempt goes nowhere. This time, the attackers had an answer ready for exactly that hesitation. A video call, not a phone call, not a follow-up email trying to sound more official. A live video conference, with the CFO and several other colleagues joining, all visible, all talking, all sounding exactly like themselves. Let's stay inside that call for a moment, because this is the part of the story that makes this case different from almost anything that came before it. The faces moved the way real faces move. The voices carried the same tone, the same phrasing, the same small verbal habits that make a colleague sound like a colleague and not like an actor reading a script. If you'd been in that meeting yourself, watching 4 people you already knew, there is no obvious moment where the illusion cracks, no stiffness, no lag, no uncanny stillness. Just a normal-looking meeting discussing a request that had already been framed as urgent and confidential. None of it was real. Every face on that call, every voice, had been built from publicly available video and audio of the actual executives. Earnings calls, recorded presentations, anything with their likeness that had ever been posted anywhere online. Assembled into a synthetic version of a meeting that never happened, with people who weren't in it. The employees' doubt, the one instinct that should have stopped this cold, didn't survive contact with that meeting, because the entire design of the call was built to answer his one specific objection. This looks fake. It didn't just override that thought. It replaced it, in real time, with the exact evidence a reasonable person would normally trust. Seeing your CFO's face, hearing your CFO's voice in a live conversation. Over the course of that call and the instructions that followed it, he executed 15 separate wire transfers. 15, not one, spread out to look like normal business activity instead of a single suspicious transaction that might trigger a review. That detail matters as much as the total amount does. It means whoever built this attack understood exactly how finance departments monitor for fraud and structured the theft specifically to move underneath that threshold, transfer by transfer, all in the same day. By the end of that single day, 200 million Hong Kong dollars, about 25.6 million US dollars, had left the company. Nobody caught it in the moment. Nobody on that call could have, because nobody on that call except him was actually a person. The fraud wasn't discovered through some clever internal alarm. It came apart the old-fashioned way. Weeks later, through a manual check with company headquarters, a conversation that happened completely outside the system the scammers had already compromised. Someone finally asked the actual CFO, through a channel the deepfake had no way to intercept, whether any of this had really happened. It hadn't. Weeks, not minutes, not hours, weeks between the money leaving and anyone realizing what it had actually paid for. That gap is its own kind of evidence. It means nothing about the transfers themselves looked unusual enough to trigger a second look. 15 transactions, properly formatted, apparently authorized by people who were, as far as every system involved could tell, exactly who they claimed to be. The fraud wasn't clumsy. It was engineered to look completely unremarkable from the inside, and it worked for as long as nobody stepped outside the one channel the attackers controlled. Hong Kong police confirmed the case publicly in February 2024. It took until May of that year for Arup to be identified as the company involved. As of the most recent reporting on the case, no one has been arrested, and the money has not been recovered. So here's the question worth sitting with. How do you fake an entire meeting? Not one voice on a phone call, like scams before this one. A room full of people, moving and talking in sync, convincing enough that a suspicious employee's doubt didn't survive 5 minutes of watching it. The answer isn't as exotic as you'd expect. Face and voice synthesis tools work by training on real footage and audio of a person, and for anyone senior enough to be worth impersonating in a scam like this, that footage already exists in enormous quantity. Earnings calls, conference keynotes, interviews, company videos. Every public appearance a real executive has ever given is, in effect, training data sitting in the open, available to anyone willing to collect it. Build enough of that footage into a model, and you don't get a shaky imitation. You get something close enough to fool someone who has genuinely worked with that person for years, because the model isn't guessing at a stranger's face. It's reconstructing someone the target already trusts, using that person's own real recordings as the blueprint. For years, the running advice for spotting a deepfake was to watch for the tell, the blink that happens a little too evenly, the mouth that doesn't quite match the words, a flicker at the edge of the jaw when the head turns too fast. Those tells were real for a while. They are not a reliable defense anymore. The technology closed most of that gap in a short span of time. And a live video call, with real-time back and forth and no chance to freeze the frame and study it, is exactly the environment where whatever gap remains is hardest to notice. This isn't an isolated case sitting alone in a report somewhere. Deepfake-related fraud losses in the United States alone were estimated at roughly $712 million in 2025, and the method keeps escalating. In a separate case reported in May 2026, a victim was convinced to transfer close to $4 million after a deep-faked video call impersonating a country's own prime minister and several government officials. Different target, different country. Same underlying structure, a live call, familiar faces, urgency, and money moving before anyone had a chance to verify anything outside that call. That's the pattern investigators want people to understand. Not a strange story that happened to one engineering firm. A method. Reusable, and it scales with exactly one thing. How much real footage of you already exists online. Which is why the people most exposed to this specific version of the attack aren't random individuals. They're the ones with the most public footage attached to their name and the most authority to move money on a single conversation. Executives. Finance leads. Anyone whose face and voice show up in earnings calls, keynote talks, company videos, the kind of material organizations post publicly on purpose. The more visible the role, the more raw material exists to build a convincing fake of the person in it. Which brings us back to that first instinct, the one the employee had before the call, the one that got overridden. He was right to be suspicious of the email. The system failed him at the next step, the step everyone has been trained for decades to trust without question, seeing and hearing someone directly. That trust used to be reasonable. A live video call, with a real-time back and forth, used to be about as close to certainty as a company could get without someone physically walking into the room. That is no longer automatically true, and pretending otherwise is exactly what this kind of attack depends on. The defense that actually works here isn't, "Look more carefully at the screen." Trained employees, in a professional setting, with every reason to be alert, still lost $25 million while looking directly at faces they recognized. The defense that works is structural, a second separate channel of verification that never touches the call itself. A callback to a known number, not one provided in the meeting. A confirmation through an internal system the attackers were never inside. Anything that exists outside the exact conversation being used to convince you. The video call being convincing is not evidence that the request inside it is legitimate. Those are two separate claims, and this entire method depends on a target treating them as if they're the same thing. Think about what it actually takes to be the person this happens to. Not someone careless. Someone whose entire job is built around not trusting a single unverified request, who did exactly what he was trained to do when the email arrived, and hesitated. The system didn't fail because he let his guard down. It failed at the one checkpoint that was never designed to handle this, the moment where seeing and hearing a colleague live in real time stopped being proof of anything, and nobody had updated the rulebook to say so yet. $25 million is the number that made this case famous. But the detail worth remembering isn't the size of the loss. It's the moment right before it. A trained professional, correctly suspicious of a phishing email, invited onto a call specifically designed to dissolve that suspicion, using the one kind of evidence humans have trusted the longest. That's not a story about one company's bad week. It's a preview of what verification is going to have to mean from here forward, because the call that convinces you is no longer proof of anything on its own. Follow the evidence. We'll see you in the next case.